called Lolita, it has to be a fetish. Why are you dressed like a child? Oh my god, are you trying to attract pedophiles? Hey, little Bo Peep, can I be your sheep? Whoa. Hold up, really? If you're familiar with Lolita fashion, you've probably heard the whole fetish thing before. So why is Lolita called Lolita anyway? Perhaps we ought to start on what Lolita actually is first rather than what it isn't. Surprisingly unrelated to the book of the same title, Lolita fashion today is characterized by a clothing style which draws its inspiration from the Rococo, Romantic and Victorian periods. The cuts and styles are reminiscent of those worn by young ladies, and the overall concept of the subculture is to appear as kawaii or as cute as possible. Now, for an overseas audience, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh my god, what about Nabokov's book? I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, there are childlike elements to the style, and everything's in a name. And what's more, because women's bodies are constantly objectified and sexualized in public spaces, we usually read what she wears as a form of sexual expression or aggression. And then there's that subgenre, lolicon. Well, Lolita fashion today is actually a form of sexual expression, but it's one which asserts modesty and the right to dress and appear as a woman chooses to without actually having to please a man. It's not about having sex at all, period. Gagnè identified that up until recently, Lolita girls actually used a different spelling to separate what they wear from lolicon. It's called Lolita fashion now though. But you probably heard all that before, and that doesn't really explain the name, hey? So why is it called Lolita? You may have heard the argument that Lolita is a form of wasei ego, which means a borrowed English word which people in Japan might not actually fully comprehend. Some people say that Lolita was chosen because it sounds cute. Now this is somewhat true. Lolitas I've spoken to have suggested that perhaps the name reflected the youthful style in sound only, Lolita. But actually that's not completely correct either. The name seems to have emerged collectively over time as people began to develop the style together. It's quite true that participants today still aren't actually quite sure where the name came from 100%. But from what I've gathered during interviews, the answer seems to be twofold. First of all, the name Lolita comes from Dolores, which means the Virgin Mary of Sorrows in Spanish. What a lot of people don't realise is that Lolita fashion sprung from the goth scene in Osaka and Tokyo, where girls in the 90s were donning neo-Victorian leather dresses with a style which depicted waif-like, tragic, deformed and broken little doll-like figures. It wasn't actually all about visual kei cosplay. Lolita in this sense was chosen to reflect this darkness and antagonize and confront the public, and it's working, right? Another idea suggested to me was that when the pastel and vibrant colours entered into the fashion scene there, magazines like Zipper were doing spreads titled Lolita, inspired by the 1997 film adaptation of the novel. This involved styles that didn't follow the strict Lolita rules about modesty. Not comprehending the full implications of what was being suggested by the name, other than appearing just a little bit cute and playful, this was taken on by designers and participants. Lolitas eventually took on the colours, but not the style. We need to remember that actually, not everything's in a name. Think about it, the name football can be applied to two different sports. Are we really going to suggest the two sports are exactly the same? A lot of Lolitas in Tokyo said they wish the name could be changed to Alice Kay or something. And I think why not? But we also need to remember the cultural gap between Japan and here. Not everyone in Tokyo has read Nabokov. We also need to think about what this says in terms of how we read the female body when we jump to these conclusions. A human body is more than a sexual object, after all. If you want to keep learning about Lolita fashion, subscribe and stay tuned. Thanks for watching!